Hey folks, so I'd like to show you an example of solving a rational inequality. You'll notice that I've pulled up over here on the left side your how-to list from the previous video. And this is just going to be an example that works through each one of those steps in the how-to list. You'll notice that very first I'm supposed to factor the numerator and the denominator completely. That's what step number 1 tells me to do. And my numerators and denominators, notice on part A, B, and C, they're all exactly the same. And they're already factored. Step number 2 says that I should make a list of all of the factors, whether they're on top or on bottom. And so that's what I'm going to do next here. The x plus 1 is one of my factors, and x minus 4 is the other factor. Step number 3 says that I should find out what makes each factor equal to 0. And we know that this first factor here, x plus 1, negative 1 makes that guy equal to 0, and positive 4 makes the second one equal to 0. And the next part says that I should put these on my number line. So make sure you put them in order. I know that that should go without saying. So my negative 1 value goes on my number line, and my positive 4 value also goes on my number line. Step number 4 in the how-to says that we should find an interval of numbers around all of the values that I just placed on the number line. So what that's talking about here, you'll notice that this here is an interval of values. It starts at negative infinity and it goes all the way up to negative 1. So my interval of values here would be the interval negative infinity and negative 1. And then I have an interval of values between my two critical values, and that's going to be from negative 1 to positive 4. And that represents all of the values between those two guys. And then thirdly, I have all of the values that start right after 4 and go all the way to positive infinity. And those values are going to be from 4 to infinity. Now, step number 5 in your how-to list says that you should use a test value from each interval and the values from step number 3 to plug into each factor. And I'm going to get out a positive, a negative, or a 0. Okay, here's what this means. So pick a number out of my first interval, any number you want. You can pick negative 2, you can pick negative 200, you can pick negative 5 million. Pick any number you want to, as long as it is in that interval. And then I want you to plug whatever number you chose, I want you to plug it into that first factor. So if you pick negative 2, ask yourself, is my result going to be negative? Is it positive, or is it equal to 0? And this is going to be the same no matter what number you choose in that interval. Any number you choose in that interval, when you plug it in to the factor x plus 1, is going to cause a negative. Same thing with the next factor, x minus 4. If you want to use that same number from your test interval or your test value, that's fine. Or if you want to choose a different test value, that's fine too. But any number you plug in is going to end up being a negative once you plug it into that interval, or plug it into that factor. So that's the first thing. Plug it into the first interval. Next, we want to plug it into the actual value we found. So we want to plug negative 1 into our factor. When you plug a negative 1 into x plus 1, you're going to get 0. When you plug negative 1 into x minus 4, you're going to get a negative. So once again, the only three things you're going to write down here is either a positive, a negative, or a 0. Next, go ahead and pick a test value inside of here. So you could pick maybe something like 0 or 2 or 3 or 1. So there's several different values that you can choose. Pick any test value you want, and let's plug it into the first factor. So let's say I choose 0, and I plug that in. When I do 0 plus 1, that's going to give me a positive. But when I plug it, that same number, that 0, into the next factor, 0 minus 4, I still have a negative here. Next, go ahead and plug in that value from step number 3. So when I plug in a 4, 4 plus 1 is a positive number. 4 minus 4 is 0. And then lastly, choose a value from your last interval. You can choose a 5 or 70 million. Choose anything you want to. When you plug in that number into x plus 1, you're going to get a positive value. When you plug in that number into x minus 4, once again, you're going to get a positive value. And that takes care of the how-to for step number 5. Now look at step number 6. Step number 6 said we should multiply and or divide our signs to get a final sign. Here's what that means. Use your fraction. Use your original rational equation. And since mine is dividing the x plus 1 by the x minus 4, then I'm going to be dividing my signs. And so that's what I'm going to do. The first pair of signs that I'm going to take are these right here. So a negative divided by a negative is going to give me a positive. And I'm going to do the same thing for the next pair of signs. Only now it's going to be 0 divided by negative. Well, 0 divided by any number is 0. Now take the next pair of signs. Positive divided by negative is negative. Take the next pair of signs. Positive divided by 0. Remember, you're not allowed to have a 0 on bottom, so this is undefined. That's what that UND stands for. It's undefined. If you were graphing this, this would be a place where there would be a vertical asymptote, but we're not looking at a graph. And then lastly, we have positive divided by positive, which we know is positive. These are the signs that we're going to use to answer the question of, is my rational equal to 0? Is my rational greater than 0, or is it equal to 0? And lastly, is my rational less than 0? These are the signs that we're going to use to answer those.